Good afternoon. We're here with Ron Trimble, an old timer from Marshallton whose family goes way back. Ron, do you want to talk to us about your family going back to Trimbleville days, where they came from, what you know of your past family's history, and bring it forward to your own history here?
Sure. Some of my family originated from Ireland and Scotland. Some say it's Ireland, some say it's Scotland, but anyhow, they seem to reside in Trimbleville. They started Trimbleville, which is south of Marshallton here. And they had a mill down there that they ran for several years. James Trimble had the mill. My father, John H Trimble, was born in Trimbleville in 1904. And my mother was born in Northbrook in 1906. Subsequently, they got married in January of 1928. Since then, after that, then my grandfather purchased a home in Marshallton at 1324 West Strasburg Rd. And that's where the family resided all those years. My grandfather passed away in 1942, so I don't quite remember him, but I had two brothers, Kenneth and also Harold, who was also known as Archie. So the three boys and my mother and father lived in that home in Marshallton. The home was purchased in 1921 by my grandfather, John F. Trimble, for $1,025. So my dad worked at Red Arrow Lines as a trolley conductor and also a dispatcher later on for the buses.
Where was that out of?
That was Lanark and also 69th Street in the Philadelphia area. Also, he had had some strawberry fields where Marshallton Manor is now. And I believe he rented that ground. I don't believe he owned it, but I believe he rented that ground, and that's where he raised strawberries. After that, they had a cabinet shop at 1324 West Strasburg Road, where he made lawn furniture and lawn ornaments. And I helped many a time in his shop making those pieces of furniture. Later on, he went into the greenhouse business. We had a greenhouse behind our home, and we also had greenhouses out at the Telegraph Road.
Where specifically on Telegraph Road?
It's where the
Distinctive Gardens?
Distinctive Gardens is now, currently, yes. We had greenhouses there.
And what did they raise in the greenhouse?
They raised mostly plants for seasonal. It wasn't a year-round production. We would raise petunias, all kind of bedding plants, vegetable plants. And it wasn't, like I say, Easter time was a big time of the year, Mother's Day. But after you got into June, then we had there was no income. It was pretty much seasonal. So we would, in the summer, or in the wintertime rather, we would raise tomatoes in the greenhouse to offset the price of oil, which at that time was probably about 27 cents a gallon. But to us, it was a big factor, so we raised tomatoes.
And how did you sell your product? Did you sell it just locally?
Yeah, we just sold it locally, yes. And word of mouth was basically how people got to know us. And I worked at Chemical Lehman Tank Lines in Downingtown. I would take a lot of the flowers over there. They would buy them over there. And also the tomatoes as well around Christmas time. The one gentleman said, I'd love to have tomatoes at Christmas on my Christmas dinner. So we would take the tomatoes over there and sell them.
And then you would sell product out of the greenhouse?
We would sell. People would come to the greenhouse and buy their product from us, from the greenhouse, yes.
And then you had a greenhouse at the house here too?
Yes, we did. That was our first venture, was right at the house. And then we bought some property at Telegraph Road. It was 8 acres out there we purchased. And they say that if you get up on the top of that hill out there, that you could see the Delaware River on a clear day. We were never able to see that. The Delaware River from the top of that hill out there above the greenhouses. On a real clear day, you could see the Delaware River. We weren't able to do that every time we went up there. It was usually too cloudy, too overcast. Also, we did rent some ground prior to the greenhouses back of the Marshallton Elementary School. They did not own the property at the time. We rented that ground, and we had to truck water up there to that. So many times we'd have to go down to Trimbleville and sit on the bridge down at Warpath Road and put the water into a tank we had on our pickup truck and take it up there, carry it up to the fields, because you had to have water especially when you're growing seeds. So many a time we get on that bridge down there, and people would want to come across there. Maybe 12 cars would come across there in a day, but as soon as you get sat up and you started pumping water, somebody had to get across there.
And I guess you yourself and your two other brothers helped your father?
Yes, we would do that. Yes, we were all involved.
You were always working.
Right, exactly.
On this family business.
Yes. Then we also rented some ground on Clayton Road from Bill Yerkes for a while too, until we got, again, this is prior to getting our greenhouses. And once we were able to get our own greenhouses, then the properties, we didn't have to use them anymore. My mother, she was a housewife in her earlier years. Before she was married, she worked at Daily Local News. After she was married, she was basically a housewife. She would serve on the election board. Every year she was on the election board at the fire company. That's pretty much where we are right now. My parents have both passed away, and my two brothers have both passed away. But
it was your father was born in Trimbleville.
My father was born in Trimbleville.
And
yes.
Did you have any cousins? What house specifically was he born in Downingtown?
I'm not exactly sure on which house it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was on the house that they moved recently down there, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But there was a large clan down there. So, Trimbles lived there for years.
Do you remember, or were there any buildings there in your day that aren't there now?
No, I can't recall any. No,
Mm-hmm.
no.
And then your mother came from Northbrook.
That's right.
So.
Yeah, she was born and raised in Northbrook, yes.
And she must have known the Marshall family, I guess.
Yes, she did, yes.
They had the sawmill down there.
Right.
And where did her family come from?
Well, my grandfather, he worked for the Reading Railroad. Actually, it was Wilmington and Northern at the time. Later, it was the Reading Railroad. He was a station agent. He was the postmaster in Northbrook. And he had a shop. He was a shopkeeper. He had a little grocery store there. But he was originally from Indiana. At one time, he lived in Nebraska. He lived in a sod house in Nebraska many, many years ago. But they settled in Northbrook because of the railroad.
Okay.
And my mother was born there, and she had two sisters who were born there.
Mm-hmm.
Alice and Hazel. They were all born in Northbrook, right across from the Grange Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, they moved down to right across from the railroad, right next to the railroad tracks.
So when you were young, did you have big family reunions?
Yeah, we had a lot of picnics down there in Northbrook, and a very enjoyable time in Northbrook. I loved going down there and watching the trains come in there and shift at Kelp Fulton's yard,
mm-hmm.
bringing in coal, anthracite coal. And that's where we got our coal from for our house, was from down there. They would bring it up in bags.
What was the name of the yard again?
Caleb P. Fulton.
That was where the canoe company is.
That's where the canoe company is now, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they would bring the bags of coal and dump them into our bin at the house, and that's where we got our coal from.
Okay.
But we had a many enjoyable time in Northbrook. I'd spend overnight down there. I remember the steam trains going through Northbrook.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big wreck down there at one time, a steam train right behind what they used to call the cream room, which is no longer there. But it was a big wreck there, and I remember that. And then later on, they went to diesel.
Mm-hmm.
But I would stay there overnight, and you thought that they'd come through in the middle of the night. You thought the house was going to fall apart. It made so much noise coming through there during the evening.
Right.
But they said he was a station master and also the shopkeeper and the postmaster. He
Mm-hmm.
wore all three hats.
Mm-hmm. But you yourself grew up right here in Marshallton.
Yes, right.
Your whole life.
Exactly.
Okay,
I
good.
lived here all around that, yes.
So where did your family come from, Nancy?
My mother was Pennsylvania Dutch, Pennsylvania German, and her family, some of the relatives were in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and Linport, Pennsylvania. On my father's side, my father was born in Virginia, and his parents moved to Marshallton in the early 1900s. He was like 2 or 3 years old when they moved here from Virginia. My grandmother on my father's side, she originally came from England, and I'm not sure like the original heritage of my mother's side, other than my grandfather's Frank Shoemaker was born in Nebraska. And my parents were, my mother lived in Northbrook. My father lived west of Marshallton, out near the Tattersall Golf Course now, in the Busby farm. And my mother grew up in Northbrook. She was born in Northbrook, and she grew up in Northbrook. My father grew up west of Marshallton, and they were married and then moved to Marshallton in 1936. So
your father had a farm out,
my grandfather,
in
Henry
Tattersall.
Busby, and Bessie Brown Busby had a farm west of Marshallton.
And what was the name of that? Is that
There wasn't a name of the farm. It was just on the left-hand side going toward Tattersall Golf Course, the
Barwell
Barwell Farm now.
on the island there with Broad Run?
And my mother's father owned the general store and was the railroad master in Northbrook. My father worked at Bernard's Orchards when he was like 17, 18, and met my mother through working at Bernard's, and they were married when my dad was 21 and my mom was 19. And they lived for a brief period of time in Northbrook, and then in 1936 they bought the farm in Marshallton, which was approximately 3.5-acre farm.
And that's where Woodwards live now, correct?
Wheelers.
Wheelers.
Edward Wheeler lives
Yes.
there now.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can remember correctly, my father bought the farm for $4,000. It was after the Depression, and I remember him saying that the people needed money, and he went up and offered them $4,000, and they took it.
So you call it
Accepted
a
it.
farm. How many acres was that?
Approximately 3.5.
Okay, so we don't consider that a farm now.
It's a farmette.
You call it a farm, but wasn't it long and narrow?
Yes.
So
Yes.
wasn't that typical of some of the properties in Marshallton?
Yes.
In that they had their house up front?
It was
and they would
narrow
farm?
and long, and it extended, backwards, long and narrow. And he had the farm, we had the farm all the way up until about 1988.
What did he raise?
My dad had 11 Guernsey cows. He had horses. We had chickens. We had pigs at one time, a couple pigs. But my mother sold the raw milk. She had a business that she sold the milk to. A lot of the customers in Marshallton came to us to buy the milk. And my father bred fox hunting horses. He had two horses. One was Lanero and one was Boarding Party. One of those two was a descendant of Man of War, and the fox
An
hunt.
ancestor of Man of War, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And the people would bring their the horses there to be bred for fox hunting. So he did that for many years. But he was a full-time employee of Luke and Steel.
So he did this on the side, and your mother, and
She was a stay-at-home housewife and sold the milk and the butter and took care of the farm when he wasn't there.
And did she sell the milk just to local people, or did it go into Westchester? Or?
We had customers in Northbrook, and we had customers down in Trimbleville, and mostly in the Marshallton area. And she sold eggs. And back at that time, I read in her diary recently that she was contemplating, but had to raise the milk to 35 cents a quart. So, and we had the farm until my father got sick back in the late 80s, and then we had to give it up.
And did she sell right out of the house?
Right out of the house. And people came in the morning and night, and she had a porch that she sold it from, and she had many customers that came.
And
7
how many
days a week.
brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 3 brothers, and I have 2 sisters.
Okay, and did they help with your
When we
mother,
were
Mel?
growing
Did
up,
you
oh yeah, the
all
boys had to help haul
Mhm.
hay and do all that. We had, a lot of chores to do in the house and, out back and in the lawn and the gardens. And so it was all of us that chipped in and had chores to do.
And were you born in Wheeler's house then, or the farm as you would call it?
No, Mary Ann, the sister next to me, she and I were born at Chester County Hospital. All 4 other brothers and sisters were born at home at the Wheelers property today.
But you all grew up.
We all grew
this
up on that
property
farm.
here.
Yes, because he bought it and they moved there in 1936. So,
Okay. And your father worked for Lucan's, and
he was a pipe fitter at Lucan Steel and retired from Lucan Steel.
And did he help too on?
Oh
with
yeah,
the farm
when he
and
wasn't
was-
there, he was working the farm. I mean, he was the main worker on the farm, and he did shift work at Lucan. So it worked out that, the only time he really wasn't there was when he did like a 7 to 3 shift.
Right.
Otherwise, he was there and milked the cows morning and night when he was there. And when he wasn't there, then my brothers had to do it until, they were out of college or out of school and went on and had their own careers.
Right, got it. You're both related, so you obviously go way back. Nancy, do you want to explain your mother and Ronnie's mother are sisters, grew up in...
Yes, they were Catharine Shoemaker and Hazel Shoemaker, and they were sisters and grew up in Northbrook.
So do you two remember playing together? I mean, were you
We did
close
things.
family?
Yes.
You got together a lot?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Picnics.
Picnics.
A lot of fun, yes.
Yes.
So did your family get milk from them? And
We sure
you
did.
get flowers
I
from
would
them?
make a milk run every day to go up. I'd take the kettle up
And
and
it's,
exchange the kettle and bring the full one back.
mhm.
Yes, we did that quite frequently. And also buy sweet corn from there, too.
Yes, my father raised sweet corn,
Yes.
and we sold that in the summertime.
So when you were both young growing up, what's the earliest age you can remember working for your parents? Were you 5, 6, 7, or teenagers, or did you just grow up
We just
naturally
grew up every
working?
day working, whatever chores we had to do, and we helped whether it was in the house or on the farm. Ronnie helped at the greenhouse.
Yeah,
when-
and then prior to that, I worked at the cabinet shop making the lawn furniture and lawn ornaments. I spent many an hour in that shop with my father.
so
Yes.
So where did each of you go to school? Right here?
right here at
Right,
Marshallton
Marshallton
Elementary,
yes.
and then on to Downingtown
Yes.
High School.
And were you close in ages, and were you in any of the same classes together?
My sister Mary Ann
Yes.
was in with Ronnie.
Right, we
She
graduated.
graduated together.
Right.
And-
Nancy's somewhat younger.
Yeah,
So-
because I was the youngest of 6, so.
What time did you go to school, and what time did you get home? And do you remember any of your teachers in particular?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
all of
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yes.
How large were your classes?
In the Marshallton School,
About 20. When
20, 25, something like that, yes, right. And you stayed in one room all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big change when we went to the junior high and the senior high, is that you had to go in and change classes, and you had to be there in a certain time. You had so many minutes to get from one class to the other, and that was overwhelming at first, because we weren't used to that in the Marshallton School.
And you just walked out your door, and you were
Right,
We were
halfway.
we walked to school. That was so we didn't bus.
right.
We walked to school. Mrs. Wickersham, whose home is right across the street from the blacksmith shop, she was our 2nd grade teacher,
Exactly.
and the last day of school, she brought the whole class down to her backyard for a picnic, which nobody would do today. But, she would take us down there and we would have a picnic for the last day of school. Miss McIntyre was our first grade teacher. Third grade, I had Mrs. Greenwood.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I had Miss Otter, I believe, for third grade.
Yes, and I had Miss Otter briefly, but she fell ill in class and passed away in front of us. So that was a traumatic day in Marshallton Elementary School. And then we had a lot of substitute teachers until they found a permanent one to come. Dorothy Perdue was the substitute teacher. Reet Ludwig was the substitute teacher. And Mrs. Geisel taught us for a couple times as a substitute teacher.
Yes.
And then it was replaced with a full-time person, Miss Crosby.
And then we had Mrs. Hagel. I had Mrs. Hagel for
I
5th
did
and
too.
6th grade.
Yeah, and then she became principal.
She was the principal, yes, later
So
on.
you went up to what, 7th grade at the elementary?
6th grade.
6th grade.
We went up to 6th. I
And
went
when
up to
did you go from
5th
there?
because at the end of the 5th grade, for me, that was when they closed Marshallton School. So then the 6th grade had to go to East Ward
Okay.
for 1 year, and then we went on to the junior high.
And you were bused, obviously.
Bus then. Mm-hmm.
I remember having Mrs. Hagel as a principal and teacher. She also instituted a lunch program. And all the kids were allowed to go out and actually, we would take turns going out making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cooking hot dogs, etc. So that was a big deal for us, to get out. We'd get out of class a
That was
little
something
early.
you look forward to.
Right, and we would take turns doing that, and we would go out, and it was a great program.
Mm-hmm.
Because before that, we were allowed to walk home for lunch if we didn't pack our lunch. We could walk home and then come back after lunch. And then we had Ricky, the ice cream man. He had a little green truck, and he would come to the school and park at the bottom of the driveway, and we were all allowed to go down and get ice cream.
Right, he'd come around lunchtime every day.
Yeah, every day. Ricky would come from Westchester. I think he came from
he did,
Westchester.
Yes.
Boy, it sounds like you really look forward to that.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Especially on a hot day.
And then we had Chris Sanderson. He would come and teach us square dancing at Marshallton. Like one day a week or something, he would come.
Okay, I'm not sure I had that.
I had Chris. Yeah, I think he came once a week, and we would go down in the basement of the school, and he would teach us square dancing. So that was that.
But I remember
church. Did you both go to church?
certainly did, yeah.
Methodist
Church.
Yes.
So was church a big part of your
Oh, yeah.
family
Oh,
life
yes, yeah,
back
it was a
then?
big part of the whole community life, really, because everything was either dinner was going on, or they had a strawberry festival, or
Suppers.
we had a Tom Thumb wedding one time up there in
yeah.
the church. It was a big deal, and
What was a Tom Thumb wedding?
They were like, what ages? I would say
I don't know.
13, 14.
maybe, or maybe a little younger, maybe.
Yeah.
And they would,
Someone has a picture of that
Yes.
where they had a regular wedding. The girl wore a wedding dress, and the groom and the ushers and the maid of honors,
right.
and it was put on at the church. It was called a Tom Thumb wedding. And there is a picture. I don't know who has that picture. Harry Can was in it. Harry Can III was in it, and I forget who else was in that wedding, but there's a whole picture somewhere in this village of that Tom Thumb wedding.
yes,
So this is a reenactment.
Yeah, a reenactment of a wedding, yeah.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Almost like a play.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was,
Yeah,
right,
it was like a play
right.
called Tom Thumb Wedding. And then, like Ronnie said, we had the Peach Festival, we had dinners, we had the MYF, which was the youth group, and we used to do make favors like for the prison, because at that time the prison was in Westchester on Market Street where the Justice Center is. So we would make favors for the holidays to take to the prisoners, or at the Chester County Hospital to the sick. We would make like Easter baskets, and at Christmas time we made baskets and put candy and stuff in and delivered them to like the shut-ins and things like that. So, but church was a big thing.
Yeah,
in
we had-
the
yeah,
village.
said
Which
youth-
was a community.
Yeah,
Yes.
the youth group, we used to take hay rides, and they'd take us down to Georgia for 'em. And we would take these hay rides down. That was great.
From here, you'd go on a hayride then?
Right, we would get down, someone would take us down in a car to Georgia for and then we'd get on a hay wagon and take a hayride. And we had that several times.
And Christmas caroling at Christmas time, we
Right.
did that.
Yes. Yeah.
How about shopping? Were there places in the village that you shopped at, or would you go into Westchester to shop?
We did Westchester because
Yeah,
there wasn't any
Westchester.
shops
No.
in Marshallton
There
at
were
that
some
time.
stores with food, some small
Two
stores.
grocery
but-
stores.
Grocery stores, yes, and 2 gas stations.
But no clothing store or anything
No, so
like
we
that.
did-
You had to go to
Moss
Westchester.
Towers was a big store.
Big
at that
store.
time, yeah, we would go there, especially at Christmas.
So would you go, say, on a Saturday night in Westchester? Was that a night out for you, or?
I think a night out for us was walking up to the grocery
Yeah,
store.
that's right. They're making an ice cream run up to the store,
Yeah.
making an ice cream run.
And where was the ice cream?
Where the Four Dog
For the
Tavern
4
is.
dogs now. Yes.
That was Mr. McHugh's grocery store and Chambers.
Mike Chambers was across the street. Yes.
Mhm.
What was Mike Chambers?
He had a store where
grocery store?
next to the firehouse, where the firehouse is now.
Where the Yellow Bow used to be.
Right. It
Okay.
was Mike Chambers, and then later on it was Oracle Junta had it. He
Yeah,
came in out from Westchester, lived above the store, and he would sell hoagies and
Yeah, he had like a deli.
had like a deli.
But Mr. McHugh had it was first, where's where the Four Dog Tavern
Right,
was for
right,
years. He had that. He had that at the blizzard of '58 when everything, all the electric.
We're
Was-
going to get to that one.
So that's what we did. I mean, Saturday night we really didn't do a lot of running
No,
around.
no, we didn't.
So when you worked for your folks, did you get an allowance? If you wanted to go get an ice cream cone or something? Or
No, I
they
didn't.
give you money?
They
My
would
father
give
would
us-
just say on Saturday night, "Hey, everybody's sitting on the front porch, run up and get some ice cream cones." So I'd go up and bring
Right.
back ice cream cones for everybody. And,
Or-
it's-
My father would sometimes put us in the pickup truck and take us to Westchester to what was it called? Where they had the
Ed and
root
Emma's?
beer, Ed and Emma's,
Ed
and
and
we would go
Emma's.
in there and they would put the frosted mugs in the container and freeze them up and then put the root beer in, and we would go in and get root beer, and that was a treat or something like that. But we didn't go to the movies until we were like in high school or even out of high school and stuff. We stayed mostly in Marshallton, and all of us got together. I mean, there was a lot of our age at that time in Marshallton.
Okay, so it's a hot summer night in Marshallton.
We would
And you're a teenager or a little before. So what do you remember? Did you get
We would
hang out as
just
a
we would
group,
get
or-
dressed up. We would get we would change from whatever we were doing all day long, and we would go up to the
Go
store,
to the store.
and we would either sit on the steps
Yeah, just
there,
kind of hang out there.
Yeah, hang out on the steps. There, were,
And the
Ronnie's
store is where the Four Dog was.
we
when you
eat
went
that,
in.
and the store across the
It was
street
across the street as well.
where the Yellow Bow used to be,
Right.
and we would just sit up there, or we would go to somebody else's house and listen to music or something.
Right.
But that was an exciting Saturday night for us. Because
Did you ever hang out with the grown-ups, or was it just?
oh
kids?
yeah, I mean
Sure.
because
Yeah.
that was part of our life too. I mean, it wasn't just our generation. We had to, go visit relatives and sit and have the evening with them.
And back in the day, did you feel totally safe? Did your parents ever
definitely,
caution you at all? You didn't have to worry about the things they worry about
I would
now?
run all over town. I mean, a couple buddies and I, we'd just be all over the place. Can Road,
And-
Wawasset Road, all over the place. And there was never any fear of anything.
Thing.
It was just
What was the traffic like back then? I mean, maybe to you it was a lot, but compared to nowadays, but
it seemed like it was a lot then, but it's really terrible now.
yeah.
I mean, it's so much different. Because back when I was growing up, they were talking about doing a Marshallton bypass, which never happened.
Right.
But,
Telegraph Rd.
so traffic was bad, but not like it is now.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Did you participate in any sports or games? I guess baseball was played
Oh yes.
in a couple different spots. They had.
Well,
Some-
the boys played
Yeah,
baseball.
we played right behind the blacksmith shop here. We played many a game back there.
Okay.
We didn't have bases, but we had cow flops back here, so they served the same purpose.
You didn't slide into base,
No.
did you?
But then we also played softball up at the elementary school too, the Marshallton School. Basketball as well.
Mm-hmm. And this was all just the local kids?
Yeah,
and
just
get
local
together
kids.
and have
Local
pickup
kids.
games?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a couple of years we even had uniforms. I had a uniform. I still have it at home. It's the Marshalltonians.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. I still have my uniform.
And in the wintertime, we ice skated down on the pond off the between Can Road and Lucky Hill Road, that pond that's still there today. We would go down there and ice skate in the wintertime. Winnie Johnson and Ruth Matson would take a group of us down on a Saturday night in the wintertime. They would test the ice first before we were allowed on it. And if they felt it was okay, then we would go down with them and we would spend the evening down there ice skating. And what we did when we were teenagers, we would collect the Christmas trees after Christmas, take them down to the pond, store them down below the berm in the pond, and then we would set a Christmas tree on fire and have a little fire afterwards, Winnie and Ruth, and we would do marshmallows and hot chocolate, and that would be our Saturday night in the wintertime was ice skating with Winnie and Ruth Matson.
Do you remember skating too, Ron?
No, I never got into the skating side of it. No,
But
no,
like Phyllis and Donna Edwards and
yeah,
Barbara and Marianne and all of us would go down with them.
Do either of you remember the cakewalk?
No, I do not remember that.
Well, I remember Cakewalk at the Peach Festival in Northbrook. We
That
had
was in
those all the
Northbrook,
time.
right?
Yeah, Harry
With
Purdue.
Harry Purdue.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, he would have those, and Warren Mercer and the Royal Ramblers would be down there every year to play. And I always look forward to the Peach Festival in Northbrook.
And then did they do a cakewalk at the fire festival?
I
The
don't recall
firehouse?
it
I don't
ever
know.
being done. Don't
When it
believe
was
so.
here in the alley, when it was right behind here?
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, we were all. Well, when I was growing up, I also was in the Cub Scouts and also went later on the Boy Scouts. And my scoutmaster was my brother, Ken. He was my scoutmaster, which is kind of unique. But we used to have the paper drives. We'd collect papers, take them to Downingtown, and turn them in for. That was our fundraising. Take them right over to the mill. We'd take them right there and dump them right into the vat. You wouldn't allow that today, but. We'd take hikes down to Deborah's Rock or
Well, your
Can
brother
Road.
Ken he hiked all over the
Oh,
world
yes, he did.
in the
Yes.
country, I believe.
He did, exactly.
And,
He was in several different countries, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
He was always hiking, I remember
Mm-hmm.
that. And your brother Archie, I remember he had the model railroads.
Right, he did,
And it went into the greenhouse there.
yes.
That's how my son originally got interested in trains. We
Mhm.
used to walk up and he would be fascinated by the trains.
Right. Well, Archie and I also had an indoor display at Christmas time when I was growing up. We'd go to the store, get some buy some trains, and every year we'd add on to it. And we had our own layouts right inside the home.
That was the
In the
Garden
wintertime.
Railway? Or?
Now this was inside the home.
Oh,
This was,
okay.
this was just set up around Christmas time. We would
Mhm.
have it. And then later on, he went to the LGB style train and had it outside.
The house you lived in, Ron, that was a double house, correct?
Yes.
So who lived in the other half? Or was
Well, when I was growing up, it was
That
strictly
was just
it was
one.
all our. You know,
Okay,
but
so-
prior to that, Honey and Dave Johnson lived in the one side,
Mhm.
in the eastern side of it at one point.
Mhm.
In fact, when I was ready to be born, my Honey had to actually take my mother to the hospital because my father had been working. So she wound up taking her to the hospital the night I was born.
Okay. I want to focus in on the overall Marshallton community in general. We talked about you growing up. So looking back on the old days, how was it different back then than it is today? You're both, Nancy, you've lived here all your life. Ron, I'm not sure when you moved out of Marshallton, but
I moved out in 1972.
certainly,
But
times are a lot. How are they different, Nancy? We'll start with you.
Because back then we knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody. You know, today it's just hard because there's so many new people in the village and, you know, we just don't get together like we used to get together. But
That's right.
when we were growing up, we knew everybody all the way up and down the street. And we had, I was saying to Ronnie previously, you know, when you asked whether the village was safe, it was safe because all the parents of our generation looked out after us. If they thought something was going wrong, they would call your parents on the phone and say such and such is not supposed to be doing what they're doing, and this and that. So we were really safe at nighttime, that we could walk up and down the street. There was a little house that's not there now between the church and the parsonage, and Maggie Mercer lived in that house, and Maggie knew everything that was going on from dusk till dawn. So if we walked up the street at 10 o'clock at night, she knew which way we were headed and where we came from, because she was like the night watchman of Marshallton. And Beanie Anderson lived over top of the store, which was Mr. McHugh's store, and she was another one that kept, she kept an eye on us, and so did all the parents. So we really did feel safe that we could walk back and forth any time of day or night, and we just never thought about not being safe in this village. But we knew everybody. That was the thing. And we, people would come to visit. Neighbors would come and visit, spend the evening with us and our parents. And it was just one big community that we knew everybody.
And is it safe to say that a lot of the families that settled here, they grew up and then their kids lived here? And
we all went to school.
Really had
a lot of
families that
connections,
go way
yes.
back.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Was there, you once again, you mentioned you guys as younger kids would go up to the, get an ice cream cone at the store. I often hear about the spit and chew.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was a men's club.
That was a men's
So
club.
Yes.
you maybe
Yes.
were never allowed.
Yeah,
in
that
it.
was
You
held in
remember
back
that,
of the
Ron?
store, yes. Back of the McHugh's store, they had it back in a shuffleboard.
Shuffleboard.
There's a big shuffleboard back there.
Mhm.
And there'd be quite a few arguments there. A lot of politics was discussed back there, and it was a great time. We just go up there and observe, because the older men were the ones that were actually playing the
The
shuffleboard.
shuffleboard.
Now, was that something that happened just on the weekends, or could it be any day? of the
It could
week?
be just about every night they were up there.
Mhm,
Oh,
mhm,
yes.
mhm.
Yeah, it was a little spit and shoot club, yes.
And the Marshallton Inn wasn't the inn at that time, Garnet. It was just a bar
Yeah.
that was run by Hen Jeffers.
And Jeffers.
And so it was either the older, men were either over at the bar or they were over at the Spit and Chew,
Yes.
if they did that.
Right.
So the bar that's in the Marshallton Inn now.
That's all that was. The rest of the
But is that bar original to your time?
Oh yeah. And that family lived in the rest of the bottom floor of the inn.
Okay.
So that was their home, and they just ran the bar part. So when you went in the front door, it was just open to the public to the left. And if you went straight back to where the dining room is now, straight down the hallway, that was their living room, and they lived on the first floor.
And what was the second floor? Just
I don't know. At that time,
Yeah,
I don't.
I'm not sure.
It was
yeah.
just closed off.
Yeah, I think it was closed off, as far as I know.
And the current Four Dog was 3 different buildings. I guess it was a grocery store.
It was a grocery store in the
Spit and Chew.
front, and then Spit and Chew in the back,
Mhm.
and storage for the grocery store
I
for
think there was some
the.
apartments back there later on, later
Mhm.
years, towards the back.
What about the fire company fair? Do you remember that?
Certainly do, yes. Yeah,
That was a big event, I guess. back
yeah, my father actually was in charge of a couple of the fairs that were held right in back of the blacksmith shop.
Right back.
Yes, right back here.
Mhm.
And every night when the fair was over, we'd have to take all the prizes that were still left. We'd have to carry them up the street to our home and put them in safe storage because there was no place here that we could store them that we felt was safe.
Mm-hmm.
So and then the next night we'd bring them back down and we'd walk them back down the street. But
And then
Well,
eventually,
was it a week-long event, the fair? Or
no,
a
it was
weekend,
it was like a
three or four
Three or four nights.
Three or
And then
four
it
nights.
eventually moved up to the school
Eventually
ground.
moved up to the school ground, yes. And one night we had Sally Starr out there. She was the main attraction one night.
We were important that night.
But we had tents up there and everything, I mean.
We had
it's-
bingo
yeah,
and
much
penny
more
pitch.
room up there.
Oh yeah, penny pitch and bingo
Yeah,
and
right.
all different kinds of games to play.
Right.
And they did the fire engine rides.
hmm But my father, he didn't help too much actively for him being an active fireman, but he actually did a lot of fundraising. Sometimes we had dinners actually in the old, where the Acme supermarket used to be in Westchester, Darlington and Market. Up above there, we'd have suppers in there for the fire company, benefit the fire company. So he did several of those, and then got involved with the fairs too. But went up to the schoolhouse, and other people took the responsibility.
What about the blacksmith shop that were in here? What do you remember in the day? I guess Mr. Ludwig ran the shop till '54, I believe. Were you around?
Oh yes, we'd come down, but we'd observe all the time that somebody bring in a horse, and he would make little rings out of horseshoe nails and give them to us. And we thought it was the greatest thing. So,
And then Mary Evans later on opened up the antique shop here, and we used to come down and browse through that and see what she had. But back in the early times, I don't think there was anything that went on this side. Do you remember?
No, I don't believe it was.
It was
pretty
just
much dormant,
blocked
yes.
off.
Right. It was done on the other side. Yes.
So you used to hang out here as a
Oh yeah, we just come in, just observe. He was shoeing a horse. Yes. And
Were there any other hangouts that you remember in Marshallton that you went to specifically, other than the store, the blacksmith shop?
Other than to other kids' houses, people would after school. I can remember after school, my two sisters and a couple of the others that were her age, they would come to our house and they would play, American Bandstand. They would watch American Bandstand, dance to that, or play records and dance, in the afternoon before we all went home to do homework. But other than that, it was quiet. It wasn't a very exciting Saturday night in Marshallton, but that's what we grew up with.
Are there any old tales that you remember that were passed down that you particularly remember, or prominent people? I guess Harry Can and the Can family.
The little Can family
were
was
probably
prominent.
in your time
Yes.
a prominent.
Yes, they were.
What effect did the Can family have on your lives, if any?
Well, Harry Can and Mrs. Can was, they lived right beside the blacksmith shop here, and they had a beautiful rose garden that we used to go down and view every summer. He had a lot to do with the baseball team, Harry did,
Right.
and he would have some of the baseball team out here to entertain them out here in Marshallton. But very nice people.
he was an artist also.
So, yes.
And every year you'd get a card from him with a painting of the blacksmith shop, the Northbrook Bridge, some local
Historical place.
historical place. He would, I still have all those at home, and they're all. They did that for like 20 years probably. Different paintings.
And they owned Esco Cabinet Company and Bannack Dog Food. Remember Bannack
Yes.
Dog Food? Yep, they had that in I think that was Westchester where they had that company. So they were prominent people in the village, and Harry Can was very good to me. When I graduated from Goldie Beacom in business, he offered me a job at the bank. He was one of the, I think he was a director on the board of directors, and he called and said, "Nancy, you have really good grades." I called Goldie Beacom. "I got a copy of your grades. If you want a job at the bank, it's yours on the day you graduate." But I wanted to do medical, so I said, "Thank you very much, but I don't want to do banking. I want to do medical." So it was very helpful to me, but very nice family.
Yeah, also, I was the paper carrier for 7 years, from 1954 to 1961, until I graduated from school. I knew everybody in town, from one end of the town to the other. I delivered daily local news originally, then I went to carrying also the Philadelphia Bulletin, and that was evening and Sunday. I would take, so I had a bag on each side, and I would go from one end, go with one east end of town, come back to the home, get more papers, and go to the west end of town.
Did everyone pretty much get the paper in those
Oh
days?
yes, they did. Yeah, yes.
And did you have certain clients that you remember especially that would give you tips and
Oh, yeah,
Christmas?
yes. In fact, I still have a list of people that gave me gifts at Christmas time back in the day.
Well, I can relate to that. I was a paper boy too, and I
Okay.
know that I always knew the ones that gave you the tips and that didn't. Every once in a while you get shorted on your newspapers, and you had to decide who you weren't going to give the newspaper to. So you know who never
Right.
got one. And maybe that's why we didn't get a tip for that.
Right. I had an incident one time where I was bit by a dog, and to this day I'm still leery of dogs. I was
From that
bit. It was a
experience.
traumatic experience for me. Yeah, that happened down at Homer Can property. It's actually Gilbert Can lived there at the time. The other time I had an incident was I remember when the fire truck, when they had the fatal accident on the fire truck on June 1st, 1954. The fire whistle had blown, and I was on my way on my paper route, and I was heading towards the meeting house. And coming through there was a lot of activity, and I knew something was going on because the fire truck had just gone out. And what had happened was there was a fatal accident right there at the end of that road. And the boys, there's several of them had been playing baseball at the field down in Baldwin's Meadow. Fire whistle had blown, and one fellow came up there and met the fire truck head on, and he was killed. And I was walking through there. They actually had him in the back of a pickup truck to take him to the hospital. They didn't want to wait for an ambulance. So he wound up taking him to the hospital, and he passed away.
And that was a
in no
local
time.
boy?
Yes, it was. He lived right down the street. Everett Russell was his name.
That must have been big news back then.
It was.
That was
The fire company was only formed in 1953, and this was June of 1954, so less than a year old when that happened. But I always remember that, walking towards the meeting house, and they were coming through with this pickup truck, and not knowing at the time what was going on until I got up to the scene. But there was a family who lived there. There was a man and a woman who lived across from the meeting house. Her name was March. Bill and Tilly March, and they were quite a characters. Sometimes she had a gun, and sometimes she'd just shoot the gun off, and I'd be going through there the paper route. I wasn't sure if I was going to get shot or not. But well, she had a son who was a doctor in Hawaii, and she actually sent him. He sent a live lay to her, and she gave it to me. And I said, "You want to keep this?" She sent it to you. I said, "No, I want you to have it." So she gave me that. I was thrilled to death. You know, it was right from Hawaii. Orchids.
He would send that to her every year for her birthday. Elsie March and her husband would plaster. They were stucco people that would come in stucco houses in Marshallton. And they were a character, but
Yes,
they were great stucco people. And they had a little, like a station wagon, an old station wagon, and they would come and do different people's houses along the street here in stucco and plaster. And but every year on her birthday, her son sent her this lei from Hawaii.
Right.
And she was stuccoing the house 2 doors down from my parents' house when I started school, and they were working on Smyers' house, stuccoing the outside. And we came down the street. Mrs. Schiffoni had an antique shop, which is the building is still beside my house today. And we were coming down, my mom and I were coming down to the antique shop, and Elsie said to my mother, "Do you have her ready to go to school?" And my mom said, "Yeah, she's ready to go, but I can't teach her how to tie her shoes because she's left-handed, and I can't get her to tie her shoes." And Elsie, she was a little abrupt, and she said, "Hazel, bring that girl down here at lunchtime. I'll have her tying her shoes by the time I get finished with my lunch." And we sat on the bank, and by the time she got done eating her sandwich, I knew how to tie my shoes because Elsie was left-handed. She said, "She's got to learn how to tie her shoes before you send her to school." So she taught me how to tie my shoes. And I did work at Mr. McHugh sold his store and to Cliff Reeder. And I worked at the store where the Ford Dog is. I started there in '68 when I was in 10th grade of high school. And I worked there until they closed it and it was converted to the oyster bar at that time. But so I remember a lot of the people with the shuffleboard because that was still going on when I started there in 64.
Mm-hmm. And it was just like a small grocery store?
It was a small grocery store.
Yeah.
Cliff had all kinds of groceries. We sold loose ice cream. We sold lunch meat. We made hoagies over there also. And I worked there until it closed, and it moved to Highland Orchards, where the village market is now in Highland Orchard. And I worked up there when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
So I do remember the Spit and Chew a little bit.
So was it Tommy Baldwin that converted the Four Dogs?
Yeah. To the oyster bar.
Yeah, the Marshallton Inn.
And that, I forget what year Cliff moved the store up to Highland Orchards. But
So he was a prominent figure back then, I guess.
Cliff
Tom
Reeder
Baldwin.
and
Tom
oh
Baldwin.
yes, oh yeah.
He was trying to buy up the properties and create a little Williamsburg.
Right.
And that was when Tom and George Mershon did the carriage rides on a Friday and Saturday night from the Arts Center in Westchester. They
Right.
had a carriage, a stagecoach, and you could sign up. And if you were having dinner at the inn, you could leave your car at the Arts Center and you would come to the Marshallton Inn by stagecoach.
Really?
After dinner, they would take you back to the Arts Center. And that was on Friday and Saturday nights. Like in the summertime, they would have the stagecoach rides. And I think one of Harry Cahn's paintings of the Marshallton Inn is with that
I
stagecoach
think so. You're correct. on
in
that,
front
yes.
of that inn.
Right.
And they did that for several summers. And they would bring the people out. It was only so many they could do in the course of an evening. But they would run the stagecoach on the weekends.
Who owned the stagecoach, Tommy?
I don't know. I don't know whether. I don't think he did. It may have been Mr. Laird down on the Laird farm, which
Georgia Farm.
Georgia farm. He may have had that stagecoach. I'm not sure who had it, but I know that they did it for the inn on the weekends.
And there's a prominent person too, Chick Laird. He owned all the
Yeah.
every farm around here, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
After the
it
can.
might have been his stagecoach that they used.
Seems to me it was.
I think so too
Right.
now.
So later in life in Marshallton, World War II might be a little early, but do you remember Korea at all? And there were a number of boys from Marshallton that were killed in World War II.
Two.
Yeah, my cousin Horst Keller was killed in Germany in World War II. And then just down the street, 2 houses down, was George McAllister was killed around the same time in World War II.
Yeah. But I always heard there was a disproportionate amount of boys from this area that were killed.
Yeah.
And they are, well, the memorial tombstone in Bradford Cemetery, West Bradford Cemetery, is in honor of all those that lost their lives in World War II.
Right.
And that's why Harry Perdue started like the Memorial Day parade here to honor those that served during the war.
We were talking about the year 1954. Do you remember Hurricane Hazel in 1954?
I sure do. Yes, I do. Yeah.
What was that like around here?
Well, it's pretty hectic. I mean, you know, it's
A lot of wind. I
yeah, a
heard.
lot of wind. Yeah, a lot of downed trees and a lot of damage during that time.
So
yes.
being from Trimbleville or Northbrook, and your family too, you remember a lot of flooding back then? Do you think it's more today than there was in the past?
I think it's less flooding now. You know, but it used to be. I remember it used to overflow its banks almost at a normal rainstorm almost. But so it seems to be less flooding. Yes, because my grandfather had that store there, and sometimes that water would come almost up to his store
Right.
there in Northbrook, right off a big old road.
What about the blizzard of '58? That was a big one around here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that was my first time out with the fire company. I was only 15 at the time. I was slightly less than, I should have been 16, but I was volunteered to help out with setting up generators for people that had lost their power. So I went out on the fire truck, rode on the back of the fire truck, which you don't do anymore, but that was quite it was cold, and you had to ride on the back of that fire truck. Now everything's enclosed, and
Who was plowing the road?
well, we were able to get through enough that
Yeah.
I remember especially specifically going out to Emeryville Hospital across from there, the Ekdahl property, and setting up generators there so that they could keep their freezers going.
For the hospital.
No, just for their home.
Oh, okay.
Just for their home. And then we did other set up the generators for other folks too. And I think in that storm, I wasn't on this one, but there was a lady down on Telegraph Road,
Mrs. Hoxton.
Hoxter. They had to take her to the hospital. She was having a baby.
And she named the baby it's either the baby's first name or middle name was Bradford, and I can't remember which, but they took her to the hospital because she was delivering.
Right.
She was in labor, and they
during the
had to get
storm.
her to Chester County Hospital.
But I wasn't on that particular call, but I remember when it took place, yes.
And we lost electric for, oh my gosh,
yeah.
several days.
It was a bad storm.
It was a
Oh,
heavy, wet snow.
It was.
Heavy, wet snow. We had the blizzard, and then the electric went out for several days, and my mom still had a cook stove in her house. So we all slept and hung out in the kitchen, and different people she would cook food for because people didn't have electric. So her friends or people that knew we had a cook stove would call and say, you know, could you cook some soup for us? Could you cook a piece of meat for us? Could you do this? So when the electric was out, my mother did that for different people because they did not have electric to cook their meals. And then my dad had the farm, so without electric, we couldn't pump the water to water the animals. So the man next door had a hand-dug well underneath his side porch. So he ripped up the porch till he got to the open well, and we would carry buckets of water around the front of the house and all the way back to the barn. We would relay because we had the water. We had 11 cows, we had chickens, we had the pigs, we had the horses. So we did that until the electric came on, because if you take a whole big bucket of snow and put it on a cook stove, you ended up with about 2 inches of water. And that got a little out of hand.
So what house had the well?
Mr. Bear had the well.
Which house was that?
That is where Richardson's lived.
Okay.
Beside my parents' house.
Okay.
So he said, "Look, let me tear some boards up off the side porch because I know there's a hand dug well out here."
And it still had water in it?
Still had water in it, and they could put the buckets down on a rope and pulled it up, and then we would relay it around to the animals.
Wow.
And that's how we took care of the animals during the blizzard. And then, back then we had all the kids in town, so kids would, offer to shovel walks for money, and people paid us to shovel walks and all of that. And then the store where the Oyster Bar was and the Four Dog Tavern is today, they didn't have electric, so after 2 days or 3 days, their freezers were gone bad, so they couldn't do the ice cream anymore, and they had a snow pile outside of the store that was like this high, and it was probably as big as this room. And so one day, Mr. McHugh said, we were all up there, and he said, everybody go home and get a bowl and a spoon and come back, because all of this ice cream is starting to melt, and we're giving it all away for free. So we all ran home, got a bowl and a spoon, and we sat on this huge snow pile and ate ice cream all afternoon, because they had the big drums of loose ice cream, and he had to get rid of it. So he said, you kids go get a bowl and a spoon and come back and get all the ice cream you want. Wow. We were in seventh heaven. We could shovel the rest of the day. We were so sugared up. So that was, the general life in the village. But
I bet your father was happy he kept that wood stove.
Oh, he said with the kids, I told you so.
Yeah.
Because we stayed all night in the kitchen, the ones that, were younger, and my mom would take bread and put a long fork and put it in the bread and open up the top of this, the burners. Best toast you ever had in the world. So we had no problem, but he was glad that the cook stove was there.
Yeah, right.
What'd you do to keep warm?
I can't recall at the moment. Just extra blankets. Just. But we had a cook stove as well.
Yeah.
So we were okay cooking wise. Yes.
Yeah. And you just stayed in the kitchen
Put on
where
some
the
extra
heat
blankets.
was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Nancy, you mentioned your father had, I guess, horses that he bred for hunting.
And he had horses that he bred himself and sold as colts and stuff for fox hunting, because my father loved horses and hounds. And
So was he in the hunt?
He did fox hunt earlier in his life. I don't remember him. He followed the hounds all the way up until he could no longer do that due to his health. But when he was first married and they first bought the farm up here, I know that he did fox hunting. But at that point, I don't remember that.
Do
But
either of you remember any fires back in the day? That I guess Marshall had quite a few fires.
Yeah, I remember.
There was a barn right in back of this blacksmith shop because my father rented that to put some of his horses. And that burnt down.
Yes.
And there was a big garage type barn right next to the church. It's on the property where if you're looking at the church, it would be to the left of the church, east of the church. And that garage and barn burnt down. They said it was due to the person that was living there at the time was propane gas on a grill in the summertime, and it ignited, and that burnt. But that's the only two that I really
I remember two incidents before the fire company was actually formed. One was the store up here burned. And the company's had to come out from Westchester, so it took quite a while to get out here. Where the Four Dogs is now, that burned at one time.
Okay.
Also, the property next door, Can property, they had their garage and it was on fire. It was a freezer malfunction. And that both those were prior to the actually fire company being formed in 1953. I do remember being on the fire call at the Glen Hall Bridge when it burned down. It was in the middle of the night, and we got out there and it was just too far gone. It was completely involved. And all we could do
It was a covered bridge.
a covered bridge, and all we could do was
It
basically
was a twin covered bridge, right?
No, I think it was a single, I believe.
Right down on.
Glen Hall, right off Brandywine Drive.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it burned, and there was no way to save it. I was on numerous barn fires. Sometimes we were able to save them, but other times they were too far gone. Mostly from hay that was put in, it was too wet, that type of thing.
Do you either of you recall? This was probably before your time, but there was an arsonist in Marshallton that burned 4 barns within a couple of days. There were some old newspaper articles about that, but that went way back. You don't have any recollection of that, do you?
No.
No, I don't. No.
It was a person that set this barn on fire when it burned, but
Okay.
I don't think it was a series of fires.
Yeah, right. What about, is there any murders or suicides that stuck in your mind?
We had a couple suicides in town.
I can remember the one.
Well, then, Vicki Evans.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mrs. Eckel, that lived in the house east of the church, going toward Westchester and before Marshallton Farms. I think my sister's, Michael was in one of my sister's class. He was in Barbara's class or Mary Ann's class, I think.
Barbara, right.
And his mother committed suicide. She hung herself in the bedroom closet.
Was this the Gray House?
The Gray House, where that
So
was.
that was a murder.
Mm-hmm.
So
It
there
was
was a
suicide and a murder
the
in that
same
house. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
Very
then
tragic.
Vicki Evans was Reverend Charles Evans' wife.
Mhm.
Had committed suicide
In
at the
the
parsonage
in
next to the church.
in the parking lot.
Right.
And then there was some boy that committed suicide down in the ravine here. too.
Wasn't that the Williams boy?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, right. The Williams boy. He lived next door to where I lived in 1324, yes. Just to the east side.
Yes. And he was just a teenager, or really young, wasn't he?
He was young.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to wrap things up here. One last question. What's not here today that you remember or you miss as far as buildings? I guess the people, maybe the camaraderie of the people that's not here. Any last comments on Marshallton?
Well, I miss the
Where
yellow
you're
bow.
already at. You're what?
I miss the yellow bow because it was a craft creative store, and I loved that store. And that closed, and you know,
Yeah, the stores were here, they closed, the gas stations were closed.
yeah.
There was a
Spalding's
bus route that
closed.
used to run through here, the Brandywine Transit used to run a bus through here, that stopped many years ago.
And back in the early times, there was a butcher that, remember Lemon
Right.
Haney? We had a butcher person that came with a truck every week and stopped out in front of the house, and you could get
Right.
lunch meat and meats and stuff. I mean, so
And we also had a guy that come along selling fish too, same thing. Like every week he would come, or every other week he would come with a fish truck.
and I think if Randy had been here, because he mentioned it and I totally forgot about it, was Nature Boy. Remember?
Oh, yes.
There was a man by the name of, and we called him Nature Boy, and I don't even, he came from Westchester, I think. I don't really know where he was. But all he wore was a white diaper in the summertime, wrapped. He was as brown as a berry, and he would just walk through Marshallton.
walk.
And we knew him, like, we would say, oh, there goes Nature Boy. And he would be just like a hiker. He would just walk all the time. And all he wore was this white drapey diaper. And nobody bothered him. You know, people would say hello to him. And he never said much. But he was just like our mascot for the summer, was to see Nature Boy walk through Marshallton. And on that note, I wanted to bring up one other thing when I said about Nature Boy, but I forget what it
Didn't
was.
he
now.
live in one of the little shacks back behind your house too?
I don't no. We had Mr. Shepard lived with us,
Okay.
you know,
That's
in the
wonderful,
little
yeah.
house
Right.
behind the.
Right.
We took. My father had a friend who worked at Emeryville State Hospital, and Mr. Shepard, they admitted him to Emeryville State Hospital, and he wasn't mentally ill. He had had surgery done, and he had had a severe nervous breakdown. He was just loved animals, and so the man that worked at Emeryville Hospital talked to the psychiatrist at Emeryville Hospital and said, you know, this man does not need to be in this facility. He needs to be on a farm. He's not anywhere in danger to anybody. So Mr. Murray came up to my dad and he said, Ed, would you take Mr. Shepard? He really needs to come out of here. He's not suited for here. So my dad said yes. And my dad, I think he came to us about 1964, 63, 64. And he was with us all the way up until my dad passed away in the late 80s. And then he stayed on for 1 year. And then he had 4 sons, but we didn't know that until the very end because they had never come to visit him, only toward the end. And finally, his one son who lived in Bear, Delaware, came up, and he spent the rest of his life with his son in Bear, Delaware. So he worked the farm. When my dad was at work at Lucan's, you know, he
helped out.
He helped out. He did not do the milking. He did do some of the milking, but he did all the stable work and all of that, and he did a lot of the lawn work and things for years. And we my father took care of him from the time he came until he left in the late 80s. So he didn't have to stay in Emeryville.
Yeah, we also had a drugstore in town too.
Oh,
for
yeah,
a few years, which was right behind with Fowler's gas station.
Okay.
And a drugstore, they had pinball machines there. We'd go in there and play pinball machine from time to time. But the
And they had a
drugstore-
soda fountain too, didn't they, with the
Yeah,
ice cream sodas and stuff? Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we got it. Okay.
And we had hobos too that
Yeah,
came
what?
to hobos
Oh, okay.
back then. My mother would sit them on the porch and she would say, sit here on the porch. She would lock the door and she would cook them a meal and they would sit there and eat a meal and thank you for them and then go on.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, that was just part of life in the summertime too, was
Yeah.
people that would come from wherever and they would be walking through town and if they saw somebody and they wanted something to eat, they would just knock on your door.
Looking back over the years, this is the best place to grow up. I have to admit,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
It sounds like.
back then, we probably didn't say that, but looking back, it was, couldn't beat it.
Family oriented,
It
community
was
oriented.
the greatest.
Right?